Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Ben. Have you ever wondered what your metabolism has to do with weight loss? Ever heard that if you go on a crash diet, your metabolism will shut down and you won't be able to lose any more weight? What if you lose weight more slowly? What happens then? And on the other hand, what if you actually build muscle? How much will your metabolism increase? These are all wonderful questions, and in the next couple of videos, I'm going to give you all the information you need to be able to answer them. When people talk about metabolism, they usually talk about how much energy they burn in any given day. And when people talk about burning energy, they're usually talking about calories. Now, calories are a unit of energy, and you can see the definition right here. The technical definition is not actually important for our purposes. What is important is that you obtain calories through the majority of the foods and drinks that you consume, and you use calories throughout the day or burn calories as your body performs all of its functions of daily living. Now, this is very important, and I want to make this clear. A calorie is a calorie. No more, no less. Calories cannot be good or bad. They cannot be empty or full. When people use these moral or qualitative descriptors of calories, what they are really describing is the nutrition content that's associated with the calories. And that is not what we're talking about here with metabolism. From the standpoint of metabolism, all calories are the same. All calories are created equal. Anyways, when we talk about how many calories we burn in any given day, we can call this our total daily energy expenditure, or our TDEE for short. This is comprised of 4 primary components, which you can see right here, and I will be discussing these in the remainder of this video. Number 1. The first of these components is the resting metabolic rate, or RMR for short. Now, this is comprised of all the activities of daily living that your body has to perform just for you to function, such as your heart beating, your liver making blood glucose, etc. You will also see the terms sleeping metabolic rate and basal metabolic rate, and I put the definitions right here, but those aren't very important because they're all very similar, so I'm just going to refer to everything as the resting metabolic rate. Here I've taken data from multiple sources to demonstrate how much various organs contribute to your resting metabolic rate. This is an example of a person who weighs 71 kilograms, or 156 pounds. The first column lists the various organs, with the last row listing residual to mean all the organs not listed above, such as the eyes, pancreas, gallbladder, and so on. The second column lists the calories burned per kilogram of organ tissue per day for each of the various organs. Right away, you can see several of the organs are much more metabolically active than others, with the brain, heart, liver, and kidneys, as well as the spleen, leading the way. Other organs, such as skeletal muscle and body fat, or adipose tissue, are much less active. More on that later. In the next column, you can see the approximate mass of each of these organs for this specific individual. All of these most metabolically active organs are relatively small contributors to total body mass, while the less active organs, such as the skeletal muscle, skin, and adipose tissue, generally contribute considerably more mass. The last column shows the results of multiplying the prior 2 columns together. When doing this, it's clear that several organs contribute fairly significantly to your resting metabolic rate, and thus your total daily energy expenditure. Your heart and kidneys each contribute more than 100 calories, while your liver and brain may each contribute greater than 300 calories, as do the residual organs all put together. Your skeletal muscle can also contribute a significant amount, with a generally smaller contribution from skin and adipose tissue, unless you are carrying substantially greater amounts of these organs. Importantly, I want to emphasize the contribution of skeletal muscle and adipose tissue, which again is the body fat that you carry, as you have more direct control over these 2 contributing organs than any other. Going back to the second column, we see that adipose tissue contributes roughly 4.5 kilocalories per kilogram per day, which comes to roughly 2 kilocalories per pound per day. When I say kilocalories or calories, I'm talking about the same thing, which is what you see on nutrition labels. Skeletal muscle is roughly 3 times this, at 13 kilocalories per gram per day, or 6 kilocalories per pound per day. Thus, if you were to lose 10 pounds of fat, you would expect your resting metabolic rate to decrease by 20 calories per day, just from the fat loss by itself. Alternatively, if you work out consistently and build 10 pounds of muscle, you can expect your resting metabolic rate to increase by around 60 calories per day. However, and this is key, it takes a long time to build 10 pounds of muscle, and it is not a trivial thing to do. So for every time you hear someone say you need to build more muscle so that you can burn more calories, you should realize that that is a very hard task to accomplish, because even if you do build a lot of muscle, it's not going to have that significant of effect. Even 10 full pounds of muscle will only increase your caloric expenditure by roughly 60 calories, at least when examining your resting metabolic rate. Anyways, your resting metabolic rate will contribute roughly 60 to 70% of your total daily energy expenditure. So it is the primary contributing factor, though it can vary to some degree based on your overall activity levels. And now that we've discussed that, we can move on to the second factor of our total daily energy expenditure. Number 2. The second factor I want to talk about today is the thermic effect of feeding, or dietary induced thermogenesis. Now, what this describes is all the calories your body has to use to consume, digest, absorb, and process all the nutrients that go into your body. You actually have to utilize calories to be able to absorb additional calories. And this varies based on macronutrient. So, the 3 primary macronutrients from a food perspective are protein, carbohydrates, and fat. Alcohol is also a macronutrient. And both protein and alcohol have similar thermic effects of feeding. And these are the highest of all the macronutrients, coming in at roughly 20 to 30%. What does this mean? Well, if you were to consume 100 calories of protein or alcohol and utilize all of this in your body would actually spend 20 or 30 calories, somewhere in that range, to actually do this. Therefore, your net calorie gain from consuming that protein or alcohol will be roughly 70 to 80 calories or so. The thermic effect of feeding is much less for carbohydrates at 5 to 10%, and the thermic effect of feeding for fat is even less at 2 to 3% or so. And these are rough estimates and they can vary to some degree. For example, people with insulin resistance will have a decreased thermic effect of feeding overall because they're not able to actually process all the nutrients they consume as well, at least if their insulin resistance is not under good medical control. Now, how much does this actually contribute to your total daily energy expenditure? Well, it roughly comes to around 10%. And this is the number you will often see cited in the literature. Again, it can vary some based on what you're eating, but that variability is not going to be very large. So, as an example, if you were to consume 2,000 calories in a day, your thermic effect of feeding would be roughly 10% of that, or 200 calories. And I'll give you a brief example here just to illustrate how it doesn't change very much based on your macronutrients. If you were to change 50 grams of carbohydrates with 50 grams of protein, your net caloric intake would be the same. And that is because 1 gram of carbohydrates yields 4 calories and 1 gram of protein yields 4 calories. Those are actually approximations, but we'll talk about that in a future video. If you were to change 50 grams from the carbohydrates to the protein, overall you're still going to get 200 calories from either of those amounts. But because the thermic effect of feeding for protein is higher by roughly 20% compared to carbohydrates, you will burn an additional 40 calories per day. However, 40 calories is not that much in the grand scheme of things, particularly when you talk about a large amount of protein, such as 50 grams difference. Therefore, there's no real sense in trying to manipulate your diet solely for the purpose of altering your thermic effect of feeding. Number 3. Moving on, the third component of your total daily energy expenditure that I want to talk about today is your exercise activity thermogenesis, or EAT for short. Now, this describes all the calories you burn with planned physical activity, such as going for a jog around the block or going to the gym to lift weights, etc. Now, this actually has 2 components. It's the amount of calories you burn during the activity and also the amount of calories you burn after the activity is complete while your body tries to restore itself to its normal state. It is actually hard to quantify both of these, and I'll talk about that a little bit more now. Looking at the first component, or the amount of calories you burn with the planned physical activity, there are lots of cardio equipment pieces out there, such as treadmills, bicycles, ellipticals, etc., that will give you an estimate. Unfortunately, these estimates are usually considerably higher than the true amount of calories that you burn. It's actually quite difficult to estimate this accurately without expensive and fancy equipment. As one example, one study had men and women perform 30 minutes of exercise on an elliptical machine while also wearing a FitMate Pro, which is an indirect calorimeter. That's one of those fancy pieces of equipment I alluded to earlier. Even as early as 5 minutes into the session, the elliptical overestimated the amount of calories burned significantly. By the 30-minute mark, on average, the elliptical estimated around 235 calories were burned, while the FitMate Pro estimated a little over 100 calories were burned. This is a very significant difference. For the purpose of getting healthier and or losing weight, you do not need to be able to estimate this accurately, but it is important to know about this issue so that you do not assume you have done a lot more work than you really have. Regarding the second component of your exercise activity thermogenesis, this is called excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, or EPOC for short. And again, this describes all the calories your body is going to burn to restore itself to its normal state after your exercise session is done. So why does this occur? Well, as you can see in the diagram, when you're exercising, you are accumulating an oxygen debt. because you're using a lot of oxygen and you're not able to breathe fast enough to replenish all of that as you're actually exercising. So once you're done exercising, you're going to still breathe faster for some period of time, and your heart's still going to beat faster for some period of time as well. And this is what your body is doing to help replenish all the energy substrates that you used and to remove all of the metabolic byproducts, etc. Now, unfortunately, you aren't actually going to burn that many calories from this afterburn effect under normal conditions. You have to exercise at a pretty high intensity for a pretty extended duration to burn a significant amount of calories from EPOC. And that was shown recently in this systematic review, which you can see on the screen. Now, what this systematic review did was review 22 different studies, and they looked at short durations and long durations of time, where duration implied how long they were looking at after the exercise session was done. Even in the longer duration studies, which would look at a larger overall afterburn effect, when looking at the high intensity cardiovascular exercise, they found that the overall caloric expenditure from this was not very high. You can see the number here listed in kilojoules, but you need to know that 4.18 kilojoules is equivalent to 1 kilocalorie. So you actually have to divide this number by 4.18 to get the actual calorie equivalent. And when you do that, even with this highest number here that you see, this actually comes to only roughly 69 calories that were burned as a result of this EPOC or afterburn effect. Therefore, because you have to actually exercise at a very high intensity for a long duration to have any meaningful contribution of EPOC at all, I'm not going to discuss it further unless I state so otherwise for specific purposes. Number 4. The fourth and final component of your total daily energy expenditure is the non-exercise activity thermogenesis. This describes all the calories you burn with non-planned physical activity, such as moving your arms when you're talking, getting up and walking around, fidgeting or rolling over in bed, etc. This can vary quite a bit between different people. People who live more active lifestyles may have a contribution of greater than 1,000 calories a day just from this non-exercise component itself. Other people who are much more sedentary, it may only be a few hundred calories. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to measure this, and you can try to alter this by changing your activity levels, but then your body might actually compensate in certain ways. I'll give you an example. It's commonly said, at least if you look at various websites online, that if you were to walk 1 mile and you weigh 180 pounds, you will burn roughly 100 calories. And this scales linearly with weight roughly. So if you weigh 360 pounds, you might burn 200 calories while you walk a mile. If you only weigh 90 pounds, you might burn 50 calories walking a mile. Additionally, you'll commonly see people say that 2,000 steps equals 1 mile. So if you were to actually try to walk 10,000 steps a day, you'll walk approximately 5 miles. If you weigh 180 pounds when you're doing this, you'll burn roughly 500 calories a day just from all of those extra steps. Unfortunately, what you aren't going to be able to control super easily is how your body compensates to all of these additional steps. You might find that you are walking more when you're counting all those steps, but then throughout the rest of the day, you're actually being more sluggish. You're slumping over more, you're sitting down more, etc. If you're not actively keeping in mind that your body can compensate in some ways, you might assume that you are adding several hundred or 1,000 plus calories per day to your total daily energy expenditure just by walking more, when in reality, because your body is compensating, the overall increase may not be nearly as much. So this brings us to the conclusion of this video. Your total daily energy expenditure describes how many calories you burn in any given day, and this is comprised of 4 primary components: your resting metabolic rate, the thermic effect of feeding, exercise activity thermogenesis, and non-exercise activity thermogenesis. All these components of your metabolism can change in some way when we lose weight. And now that you have a good understanding of the basics of all of these, in the next video, we'll be in a good position to talk about how they change during the weight loss process and how weight loss can affect your metabolism as a whole. I'll see you then.